Well, hello. My name is Angel Wood, and this is Crime of the Truest Kind. It has been a fun-filled few weeks. I say that with seriousness and sarcasm. I've been a bit preoccupied with my dogs. Lots of vet visits. One of which is having a tough time walking, so please think good things. In my house, we have been in mourning all week. Ozzy Osbourne, the Prince of Darkness, passed away suddenly at the age of 76. Look, we all knew Ozzy wasn't going to last forever, but I didn't know it was going to be 2 weeks after his final show in Birmingham. I woke up early. I watched the funeral procession, cried like a goddamn baby. I did share my Ozzy story online. I did meet him once. It is a very unusual situation, and I have Matt Damon to thank for it. I'll tell you sometime. 3 live shows announced, on sale at crimeofthetruestkind.com. I will be in New Hampshire Thursday, August 21st at Big Dog Eats. It's a friend's new place. It's on the Oval, for those who know. The show is 6 to 8, and there's very limited space. We can fit maybe 18 people in there. I'm back at Off Cabot in Beverly, Mass, Thursday, September 11th for North Shore Unsolved. I have a list of cases to cover. It's been a good 7 months since our last show, a sold-out show. I don't want to wear out my welcome, you know what I'm saying? And just announced another new venue for the show, a well-established music space called The Burren in Davis Square in Somerville. That's Thursday, October 23rd. The Burren show will be about crimes of Camberville, Somerville and its twin city, Cambridge. From the alleys to the ivies. Unsolved mysteries, missing people. The Somerville show will be on sale next week. Read all about it, crimeofthetruestkind.com. Follow the show at crimeofthetruestkind on all the socials. This is another in the New England serial killer series that I started in June. It got me into researching these serial cases, given the hysteria in the Facebook groups and Reddit subs. In the second part of this episode, I speak with journalist, author, and professor Maureen Boyle. She wrote the book Shallow Graves, The Hunt for the New Bedford Highway Serial Killer. She spent decades investigating and reporting on the New Bedford Highway murders, and is the foremost authority on this case and its history, in my opinion. We head to the south coast of Massachusetts, which is jokingly called the armpit of the state, given its location on the raised arm of the Commonwealth. This is episode 89, The Lost Women of the New Bedford Highway Murders, New Bedford, Massachusetts. New Bedford sits on the south coast. It's among the 10 largest cities in Massachusetts. Its population hit 100,000 in 2021. Comparatively speaking, Boston has over 674,000 to top the list, followed by Worcester at 211,000. New Bedford rings in at number 9. It's a city populated by immigrants, rich in culture, families coming from all over the world, with a significant Portuguese community tracing back to the whaling industry. WJFD 97.3 just celebrated 50 years serving the Portuguese community. It is a city of reinvention after the whaling business disintegrated. New Bedford is a place shaped by the sea. It sits along the Acushnet River and leads into Buzzards Bay and the Atlantic. A formidable ally, driving the industry that made the port city a leader in the fishing industry. Its harbor bustling with whaling boats, merchant ships, the vessels and the freighters filled with the goods that raised generations. Fishing didn't only support its economic engine, from whaling to modern scalloping. It is a major source of pride for the region. And if you've ever known a New England fisher person, it is a way of life. It is in their soul. New Bedford was known worldwide as the greatest whaling port in the world, the global hub, the city that lit the world, because it quite actually did. Before the arrival of the electric light that we are most familiar with, the incandescent light bulb that was credited to Thomas Edison, who, in 1879, created a commercially viable version that could last for hours. Whale oil was in high demand. Thousands of casks were filled with whale oil, something they called spermaceti, defined as wax. It was liquid at, room temperature, and used in cosmetics, candles, ointments, finishes, and for industrial lubricants. Despite its name, it's not actually whale sperm, what some folks thought back in the day. It was a different time for spermaceti. And it got me thinking, though, somewhere there's somebody named Giuseppe Spermaceti. Joey Spunk. I'm 12. This substance is obtained from the head of a sperm whale, the largest of the toothed whales, known for its enormous square head and small lower jaw. The best image I can paint for you is Moby Dick, the fictional white whale, the story based on Herman Melville's experiences as a whaler, shipping off from the Acushnet from New Bedford in January 1841. And his seafaring marked a significant change in his life and his legacy. All of this fueled his imagination, leading to a number of books, including Moby Dick. The true inspiration, though, is the story of the Essex, a whaling ship out of Nantucket and built in Amesbury, Mass. When it was launched in 1799, the Essex was believed to have been used as a merchant ship before being converted into a whaling vessel. In August 1819, the Essex set sail for that fateful journey, heading from Nantucket to the South Pacific. It was a good 2 months before they even saw a whale. That was near Rio de Janeiro, off Brazil's west coast. It was a largely bunk trip up until then. They made their way, rounding the tip of Argentina and Chile, and it wasn't until the waters off Peru when the Essex rolled into some luck. A bunch of whales. There's got to be a whaling term for that, but I spent enough time fixating on whaling history. A group of whales is a pod, a school, or a gam. Other animal collectives I have come to know: a shoal of fish, those schools are more organized, bale of turtles, shiver of sharks, smack of jellyfish, a cauldron of bats, a quiver of cobras, a convocation of eagles, a tower of giraffe, a troubling of goldfish, a thunder of hippopotami, a conspiracy of lemur, parliament of owls, a pandemonium of parrots, a rumba of rattlesnakes, a prickle of porcupines, a fever of stingrays, a venue of vultures. Somebody stop me. Now, whaling is a brutal business, and had these men out to sea for years. As the story goes, on November 20th, 1820, more than 15,000 nautical miles from the Galapagos Islands off Ecuador, repairs were being made to the Essex after some kind of mishap. A massive male sperm whale was spotted. Hard to miss, this biggin was said to be 85 feet long, much longer than the typical 65-foot sperm whale. It attacked the Essex, sinking 2,000 miles away from the South American coast. 20 crew members escaped, but only 5 would survive to be rescued in coastal waters 89 days later. Attempting to explain the normally timid creature's unusual behavior, some have speculated that the hammering on the whaleboat sounded similar to the clicks made by whales to communicate. Under this theory, the agitated animal believed that the boat was actually another male that had entered his territory. Seamen from all over the world boarded New Bedford whale ships for work. Portuguese and Cape Verdean immigrants formed the backbone of the whaling industry. The golden era of whaling in New Bedford spanned from roughly the 1820s to the 1860s. During this time, the city rose to become the whaling capital of the world, surpassing even Nantucket by 1823 in the number of ships departing for voyages. Things turned out differently for each. Now, the Nantucket Island that we know today is a salmon-colored resort for the uber rich and that guy that goes around raiding pizza. New Bedford accounted for half the entire U.S. whaling fleet. We know this boom was fueled by the demand for whale oil, before petroleum became widely available. That boom, though, began to wane for a number of reasons. Shipping routes were disrupted by the Civil War, which lasted 4 years. Kerosene was quickly replacing whale oil as a cheaper alternative, and whaling had become more difficult anyway. Overhunting made trips longer, farther, and much more dangerous. The tides were shifting in the industry. It is a city with a very rich history of textiles, and I've talked at length about the mills of the Merrimack Valley, namely in Lawrence and Lowell. But New Bedford's was a reinvention of sorts. The city pivoted from whaling to textiles, and pretty successfully. Around 1920, at the height of prosperity, there were 28 cotton establishments, operating 70 mills and employing more than 41,000 workers. Not only did the city's innovative industries bring economic wealth, it also brought a wealth of diversity. The mills attracted immigrant populations from everywhere. New Beige, a twist on the city's name, well known among locals. By all accounts that I could find, it comes from how the city's large Portuguese population pronounces it. The nickname is stuck. It's folksy, and it shows the affection that locals have for the port city. I've talked a lot about the city's origins. It is the celebrated city on the sea. On March 6, 1983, New Bedford made headlines for a very different reason. A woman named Cheryl Araujo became inextricably linked to the darker side of the city. She was a 21-year-old mother of two who was born and raised in the city of New Bedford. On this particular night, Cheryl tucked in her girls and ran to get a pack of cigarettes, leaving the girls in the care of their father. It was about 9:30. She made the short trip to the local dive, Big Dan's Tavern. She knew she could get a pack of butts from the vending machine at the bar. Once inside, Cheryl got a pack of cigarettes. She chatted with the waitress, who she knew. She sat down, had a drink. The waitress wrapped up her shift and left, and then Cheryl got ready to leave. She was the only woman in the bar. She was grabbed by one of the men. What happened next is life-altering for everyone in that room. Cheryl was thrown on the pool table and raped by that man, and 3 others joined in. While others watched, some cheering on, it was unrelenting. She pleaded for help. None came. This went on for more than 2 hours, the men repeatedly assaulting her, until she was able to escape, wearing only a sweater and a sock. She ran outside, flagging down passing cars. The one that stopped, a van carrying 3 college students, including brothers Dan and Michael O'Neill, came from the neighboring town of Dartmouth. They comforted her, brought her to the hospital. It's very likely they saved her life that night. It is a sickening story. It made national and then international news. Within days, that pool table where Cheryl was assaulted had been dismantled, the bar was sawed in half, and the tavern closed by its owners. Watch Trial by Media on Netflix, if you can stand it. She reported the rapes to the police. 4 suspects would be charged with aggravated rape: Joseph Vieira, Daniel Silva, Victor Raposo, and John Cordero. 2 other men, brothers Virgilio and Jose Medeiros, were charged as accessories. She said they cheered on her rapes. No one inside that bar that night did anything to help her. The case polarized the community. The men were Portuguese immigrants. People of the Portuguese community, of which Cheryl was one, took great offense to being part of the narrative. It split the city in 2. The trial began on February 23, 1984, and was broadcast on a new cable TV news network called CNN. It brought more public scrutiny for the treatment of sexual assault victims. It was a spectacle, quite frankly. The defense doubled down on villainizing the victim as asking for it. Her attorney did what they could to protect her identity during the trial, even providing a floppy hat to hide her face from cameras as she entered and exited the courthouse. Cameras were not allowed to focus on her in the courtroom at any time. However, during her questioning, her identity was revealed. No steps were taken to protect her name or her address. Information made public because she said it out loud on the stand during questioning. And then the newspapers began to include it. The 4 men who attacked her were convicted, but their sentences were short. The other 2 men, the accessories, acquitted. David Silva, 23, John Cordero, 24, Victor Raposo, 23, were sentenced to 9 to 12 years each. Joseph Vieira, 28, got 6 to 8 years. Thousands in the Portuguese community rallied in protest of this verdict. One woman said, "We are opposed to rape, but we cannot let immigrants be scapegoats." And by 1989, they were all back on the streets of New Bedford. If this story sounds familiar, it inspired the 1988 film The Accused, starring Jodie Foster, a landmark film about the brutality of sexual violence against women. Misogyny had a front row seat in the action and the handling of the case after. Cheryl was tormented throughout this ordeal, devastated by the public reaction, the coverage in the media, and her treatment by the defense, the brutal cross-examination. Rape myths are still widespread. The narrative that women make up sexual assault continues to be perpetuated in society. What happened to Cheryl Araujo was so traumatizing. She packed up her family and she left. She could not stay in the only place she knew. Her neighbors had turned on her. But Cheryl Araujo got very little by way of a reprieve to put her life back together. She was trying, going to school, trying to move forward, living in a new place. And then on December 14th, 1986, she was killed when her car hit a telephone pole. Her children were with her, but not seriously hurt. Her rapes made front-page news. Her death barely even got recognized. When she died, she was just 25 years old. Her case did expose how rape myths and misogyny shaped the defense strategy, the way media could frame a case to shape public opinion, and how a community responds. She was the villain. The attitudes about women, sexuality, and how they handled themselves have changed very little since then. The way victims are treated has also not been vastly improved. 40 years on, many women and men will not report a sex crime. For little faith in the system, Cheryl Araujo's story is a glaring example of systemic failures and internalized misogyny. I watched women say she was asking for it. She wanted it. The attitudes about women and sex didn't change in the 4 years following Big Dan's rape trial, when women began disappearing from New Bedford. Between March 1988 and April 1989, 9 women were found murdered, dumped along the highways around New Bedford. While most are said to be connected by a victimology of sex work, prostitution, then our language has changed. Or if you're Nancy Grace today, hookers. Someone tell that woman exploitation is not advocacy. Of the 11 women believed to have been killed by what we refer to as the New Bedford highway murders, 2 have still not been found. 19-year-old Christina Matero was last seen in May 1988, and Marilyn Cardoza Roberts, 34, was last seen in June 1988. Both remain missing. 9 women who went missing and were found dead in the area around New Bedford. Deborah Medeiros, 29, Nancy Lee Pava, 36, Deborah Greenlaw DeMello, 35, Dawn Mendez, 25, Deborah Lynn McConnell, 25, Rochelle Clifford Doparella, 28, Mary Rose Santos, 26, Robin Lynn Rhodes, 29, Sandra Botello, 24. 9 women believed to be the victims of an unknown predator. The first body recovered was Deborah Medeiros from Fall River. She was found along Route 140 in Freetown on July 3, 1988. The last to be found was Sandra Botello from New Bedford. She was found in April of 1989 on I-195 in Marion. Once the connections were made among these women, one thing became clear. They were all vulnerable and in the throes of addiction. I started reading Shallow Graves, The Hunt for the New Bedford Highway Serial Killer, written by Maureen Boyle. I got it on Audible so I can listen to the rest of it. Maureen was a reporter for the New Bedford Standard-Times when these women were being found and covered the murders extensively. She is an award-winning journalist covering New England crimes for decades. She has been named New England Journalist of the Year 3 times, authored 3 books to date: Shallow Graves, The Ghost, The Murder of Police Chief Greg Adams, and The Hunt for His Killer, and Child Last Seen, The Search for Patty Desmond. Maureen Boyle is Associate Professor of Communications and Media Studies, Journalism Program Director at Stonehill College here in Massachusetts. I really enjoyed talking with her. She knows this case inside and out. She's pro. Coming up next, my conversation with Maureen Boyle about the New Bedford Highway Serial Killer, including her take on whether there is a serial killer at large in New England today. Please support crime of the truest kind, and there are a number of ways that you can do that. Tell your friends about it. Share the show in your Facebook groups and your favorite subreddits. Subscribe to the show on your favorite podcasting platform. Leave a 5-star rating and review. Drop a tip in the jar. You will be giving the dogs a bone. And I have a lot of dogs. Become a patron on Patreon. 5 tiers starting at just $1. Follow the show at Crime of the Truest Kind. Buy some merch. Come to a live show. 3 dates just announced: Milford, New Hampshire, Beverly, Mass., and Somerville, Mass. And thank you for listening. I really wasn't intending on covering serial killer stuff. I'm interested in it for sure. Then this, and I know that you've been very much a part of it. Is there a serial killer in New England? I mean, yes, they do exist. We know that you've written about it extensively. Let's start with that, Maureen. What's your take on it? What are you seeing?
Is there a serial killer actively in New England? As far as we know, the answer simply is no. There's been a lot of different killings in different states. That's happened regularly.
Mm-hmm.
People die, people unfortunately are murdered all the time. And just because they happen, bodies are found within a week in different states, it does not mean that they are linked. People are noticing it just because of social media.
Right.
It's so much easier to say, oh yeah, there's a body in New Hampshire, and there was a body of a woman that was also found in Connecticut. Are they tied together? Maybe, maybe not, but chances are they're not, especially if they're killed in different ways or the cause of death is different.
Right. And that's one of the things that, people who even have a little bit of knowledge about how these things work, there's always generally speaking, there's an MO. There are some very definitive things that can be connected to somebody that's considered a serial killer. We've seen it over decades, and the FBI has done a great deal of work to connect these things.
When it comes to serial killers, as you know, there is an MO. There's a certain type of person, sometimes, in many cases, not in all cases, that they will target. Often a cause of death is similar, but not all the time. There are certain similarities in the cases. In the cases in New England, recently, there wasn't that similarity at all.
I'm definitely aware of some of the families who have their loved one has been implicated, who are saying, please don't include my loved one in this. I don't want to re-victimize families. And we know that this is the nature of the internet and people who want to armchair detective and things like that, which can be good for this, but it also can be very damaging. We have learned.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, there was in one of the women who was found dead. It appeared based on when you're reading between the lines that the person had some mental health issues, and which leads you to believe it could have been a suicide or an accidental overdose or something like that. That really is no one's business, at least publicly. And when the family is saying it's not a murder or it's not a serial killer, believe them. And still, there were some people who kept on pushing. Yes, there's a serial killer. What about this? What about this? What about this? And you have to say, no, you want to scream at times to say, yes, what about that? It's not just not true.
Yeah. I have seen families, for example, Sandra Crispo was a woman that's been missing from Hanson going on 6 years. And I have developed communication a little bit with her daughter about her mom's case. And then I asked her about this. And I said, I'm really sorry that your mom's being grouped up in this. And she said, thank you for that. She's trying to make the lemonade out of those lemons and say, well, at least she's getting a little bit more attention. I'll give her that. I mean, I would never speak to how a family deals with catastrophic, ambiguous losses like Sandra Crispo's family is going through, you know.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. There are some families who will say, well, it's putting a spotlight on our loved one,
That's right.
and we'll deal with the noise.
Mhm.
And then there's others who are saying, we appreciate the spotlight, but guess what? There really is a suspect in the case. And by including our loved one in this, you're distracting from who the real killer is. And you're giving fodder to the defense, saying, well, everyone was saying that this person was killed by a serial killer, and my client has an alibi for this date, and this date.
You raise an incredible point, something that I hadn't even considered, that this kind of conjecture can be damaging, especially if a case. Look, we know this, Maureen. We know that law enforcement don't share every single part of the investigation. We know that they oftentimes have discovered things that they're keeping really close to the vest because they don't want that getting out. They don't want that kind of, I make jokes about we're kind of a detective because you see those. It's even on t-shirts. I'm kind of a detective. It's like, no, you're not. You're not. You're somebody who has a keyboard, you got some downtime, and you're on Facebook groups.
Yeah.
Again, I don't fault anybody for their interest in this, and it can be very valuable. That level of interest can be really valuable to these cases, provided that it's helpful and not causing more pain to the families.
Yeah, and you don't want it to cause a distraction to an investigation. And that's the other element to this. You want people to be helpful. If they have tips, if they have information, that's when everything, all of these Facebook pages and shows are extremely, extremely helpful into a case, but not just vomiting out what your opinion is. I mean, if we learned anything from the Long Island case, where for years and years people were saying, oh, it's someone involved in the police department, and vilifying all of these individuals. And granted, some of them had some shady things came out, but they weren't the killer.
And it seems like, I don't want to say every day, because that's not completely true, but every couple of months, we're learning that that suspect, the Long Island serial killer, the Gilgo Beach case, that man has been connected to even more murders and quite possibly will be connected to even more before his case eventually goes to trial. I do see some parallels between the Gilgo Beach slash Long Island serial killer and the New Bedford highway murders because these were all vulnerable women. Not all of them were sex workers, although they get grouped into that. And I feel like that's disrespectful. I think you would agree because I know you have written about it extensively. Let's talk about the women. 9 women are believed to be victims of what we call the quote unquote the New Bedford highway murders. 2 women are missing, never found as of today, but also believed to be victims of this killer. Starting in beginning in 1988, women began going missing at, I guess, a rapid clip. Take me back to when you started covering these cases and when it occurred that they're all connected, or they started to become a serial case, if you will.
The case started before anyone even knew that there was a serial killer on the loose. The first woman went missing between March and April of 1988. And the last woman who went missing in September of 1988. Bodies did not start being found until July of 1988. Two bodies were found in July. The first one was found on the 4th of July weekend by a woman who was driving north on Route 140. That's a main road that goes from New Bedford up to Route 24, which 24 links north to Boston, for those that aren't familiar with the area here. A woman was driving up the road, had to use, to put it delicately, the facilities. In 1988, that section of Route 140 was pretty desolate. That area of the state, it wasn't as built up as it is today. She pulled over, walked into the brush, into a discreet area, and found the human remains, the woman. She contacted police, and everyone comes to the scene. The victim had no identification, and they were not able to identify her at that time. Also on that weekend, by the way, a lot of the police presence was in New Bedford for a very tragic drowning on the 4th of July weekend, where a young child drowned along with his mother. So you have this one case. They don't think anything of it. I mean, they do. They are concerned about this poor woman who's been found dead, but there is no hint that there is a serial killer. A few weeks later, two men on motorcycles on Route 195. That, of course, is the main road that would connect Providence to the Cape. They are riding in Dartmouth, and they pull to the side of the road because guess what? They also need to use the quote unquote facilities. They walk into the brush and see the skeletal remains of a woman. One of the individuals stayed there. The other one went to go get help. Keep in mind, this is a period of time in 1988. Most people did not have cell phones. Some cops had a type of a phone, but the average person did not. State police arrive. They do think it's a little bit odd that two women within the month have been found dead along highways. But you know what? It's not that odd to find bodies dumped along highways. It's not unusual. Two within a couple of weeks, yeah, that's kind of odd. The woman had no identification, just like the first body, and no clothing. Concerned at this point, but where do you go with the investigation with no name? Knowing who your victim is really the first step in finding out who the killer is. So they had no name to go with, and they don't even know for certain that the two bodies are tied together. Move forward several months, a New Bedford detective by the name of John Dextrator, he was at the station when Nancy Paiva, who was one of the victims, her boyfriend came in to report her missing. It piqued his interest because her boyfriend was not one who, might say, would willingly go into a police station. He talks to him, tracks down the woman's family members. Police report is filed. John starts investigating it because, quite honestly, he thought the boyfriend killed her. Because boyfriends' husbands are always the first suspects. So he starts looking at it as a single missing person homicide. But over the course of the following months, he discovers that a number of women with a similar height, similar weight, and most importantly, a drug addiction had gone missing. Their families had reported them missing. And he is wondering, could these all be linked together? And he went to the district attorney's office. The people at the district attorney's office were intrigued. They brought in some specially trained dogs from Connecticut State Police. Andy Redmond was a state trooper. He was considered the expert at the time in handling these dogs, because at that time, there were not a lot of search dogs trained to find human remains. And He started searching the highways, and then the bodies started being found.
At three, by this point, three women are found. I would say that's impressive that law enforcement were interested enough, right? Because it
Yes,
doesn't really always add up, considering the victimology, if you will, that we learned about these women, right?
I'd agree with you. Perhaps in a larger city, department would say, yeah. They're just off on a bender, so to speak. People who are addicted to drugs, they always disappear. They'll come back, and in some cases that is true, but in many cases it's not. And in a city like New Bedford, which is a small city, and in some ways at that time it was a very isolated city, and the families of the missing women, by and large, not in all of the cases, but in most of the cases, the families reported them missing fairly quickly. They were that concerned because even though their loved ones were addicted to drugs, they still checked in with their families. So there was still a strong family tie. I think that is really what moved the case forward. Because in New Bedford is also a city where people know each other and they have ties to law enforcement or EMS. If you have, let's say, if you have a large family, your brother or sister may have gone to high school with a cop or firefighter, or someone in your family was working on either of those jobs. There is always a really close connection. So generally, families were not, and that's not to say in all cases, but generally they were not just shoved aside. And in this case, it is good that there was a connection found by one of the detectives. Unfortunately, it wasn't found sooner, but there was no way they could have known it because the bodies weren't showing up.
How many, based on your reporting, Maureen, how many of these women had been reported missing prior to their discovery of their remains? Do you recall?
Deborah Medeiros, who is from Fall River, and she disappeared in New Bedford. She was reported in Fall River, not New Bedford. And at that time, the missing persons reports were not computerized. For people who are listening who have grown up with everything that's computerized, that was not the case in 1988. So there was nothing to enter in to say, oh, someone who matches this description was reported missing in Fall River.
There's no NamUs, there were no databases, there
No.
were no clearinghouses. And we know for a very long time that police departments didn't even communicate with one another.
Yes, even if they were right next door to each other, unless they had a friend on the other department and then they'd pick up the phone and give them a call. Nancy Paiva was the second person who was found along the highway. She went missing in July. She was reported missing in July. In November, the body of Deborah Greenlaw DeMello was found in a ramp in Dartmouth off of 195 by a state highway crew. But she was missing in June of 1988. She walked away from a prison work release program in Rhode Island. So technically, she was never reported missing. She was considered, quote unquote, wanted. Her family obviously were very concerned because they hadn't heard from her. By the way, the reason why she walked away from the release program, she was supposed to be released on parole and get into a drug treatment aftercare program. And there wasn't an opening for a woman in Massachusetts where her family lived. And she was very upset about that. Dawn Mendez, she went missing in September. She was found in November. There was another woman by the name of Deborah Lynn McConnell. She was found in March of 89 by search dog, and she was last seen by her family in May of 1988, but she was never reported missing. Rochelle Clifford Dapriella, she was found in December of 88, last seen in April of 88, identified in December of 88, and she also was never reported missing. So you've got three of the women were never reported missing.
Wow.
And then, of course, you've got two women who still haven't been found, and both of them were reported missing.
Most of the women were from New Bedford, but not all of them were from New Bedford. But we have concluded, we, meaning the general public, I guess, who follow this case, who have been, and based on your reporting, Maureen, many of them were associated with New Bedford. They eventually made this connection to them. Is that fair to say that they were all missing from the area, or they all had ties to the area despite not all of them living in New Bedford?
Yep, correct. All of them made their way or lived in New Bedford. And part of that had to do with their drug addiction. They wound up in New Bedford because of their addiction to heroin and cocaine.
Mm-hmm.
And that is really, I think, the major link in the case. As you mentioned, not all of the women had arrest records for prostitution, but all of them were addicted to drugs. And even those that had an arrest record for prostitution, the reason why they were on the street was because of their addiction of drugs. They were there not to, quote unquote, make money and pay the rent. They were there specifically because they were addicted to drugs.
We know how this works. There are locations that are popular among people who have these addictions. It's a highly vulnerable population. That's something that is really important for me, somebody who's been reading and learning about what happens to people like these women, is that they had families that loved them. A lot of these women had children. Between all of these women, all 11, there's about 15 children.
And it was very difficult for the children, many of them who were very young at the time, to hear some of the news reports, because as much as you can say, oh, you can shield them from what's being said, you can't. In one case, to give you an example how they could not be shielded, one of the children was living with a relative when her mother went missing. And during the height of the investigation, a television crew was staked out in front of her school to get a shot of her, interview her, but it really just shook her.
That's traumatic.
Yes, very traumatic.
You know, a young person can't process these things. There's no place in time where children who have gone through that kind of trauma can, without a great deal of support. Someone's walking up to you on the street and putting a microphone in your face and tell me about the worst thing that ever happened to you.
Yeah. Well, there was a couple of things that, I saw the best of journalistic ethics during this case, and I also saw some of the worst that it just made my skin crawl. And that was one example. There was another case where we were at the home of the husband of one of the victims, and a photographer stood on the guy's kitchen table to get a better shot of him. And, there was a number of reporters that were in the room. And all I could think of was, what are you doing? It wasn't one of the photographers I was working with, because I would have pulled him off the table. And I also know that they wouldn't have done something like that. If they did, they would have had hell to pay.
You covered it extensively through the Brockton Enterprise.
Originally through the New Bedford Standard Times. I was a reporter at that time with the New Bedford Standard Times. And then later I was working at the Brockton Enterprise. And one of the reasons I went to the Enterprise, because one of the victims was from Brockton and was very friendly with her mom. And I could still legitimately continue to cover the case because there was a Brockton tie to it.
When you worked in New Bedford, were they limiting what you wanted to do with the case?
Well, one editor tried to briefly at one point, but I have this really nasty habit of not listening to my editors, and I just keep on reporting on things and writing the story and say, here, use it. Trust me, here it is. So I just always make sure that an editor says no, I still do the story, and then it's on their head of why you didn't use it if the paper got beat. It's a lot harder for an editor to kill a story once it's, right in front of them.
And you still have some pretty close relationships with surviving family members of these women, yeah?
Yes. These are lovely, lovely families. And unfortunately, a number of the parents of the victims have passed on, including the parents of Marilyn Cardoza Roberts. Both her mother and father died in recent years. They were quite elderly, and I know that they had always hoped that she would have been found so that they could put her to rest. And they never got that chance. The same with Christina Montero. She was the youngest victim at 19. Her mother passed away a number of years ago. And she was very, very vocal to the state police. She would routinely go to the state police barracks in Dartmouth and talk with Josie Gonsalves, who was one of the original investigators, to say, this is what I heard, or what else is going on, and this is what I heard. What else can I do?
Thank you, Maureen. It's really interesting. I know. Pick up Maureen's book, Shallow Graves, available in all the places you get books and on Audible. That's the only place I am aware of to get a book on tape. Yes, the New Bedford highway killing story is fascinating and infuriating because all these years later, it remains unsolved. In part 2 of my conversation with Maureen Boyle, we talk about these suspects and persons of interest. Thank you for listening. My name is Angelle Wood. This is Crime of the Truest Kind. Massachusetts and New England crime stories, history, and advocacy. Follow the show online at Crime of the Truest Kind. Tell your friends about it. Come to a live show. Tickets on sale for 2 out of the 3 shows at crimeofthetruestkind.com. Thank you to my extraordinary patrons on Patreon, including Superstar EP, Lisa McColgan. Sign up for the email newsletter. You can do that too at crimeofthetruestkind.com. And did I tell you? I got new merch. Putting some swag bags together. All right, I must be going. Thank you for listening to part 1. And lock your goddamn doors.